Welcome to MacStories Unwind, a weekly recap of everything MacStories and more. Today's episode is brought to you by Mac Stadium. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is a special guest on Unwind this week. I've got Alex Guyot. Hey, Alex.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Pretty good. You know, Federico, he's busy getting new fiber optic cable installed at his beach house so that he can record podcasts 7 days a week while sitting on the beach drinking a margarita. So we look forward to the sounds of seagulls and sand and wind in future episodes. But for today, we've got Alex along for the ride. Why don't we just dive into the stories this week, Alex? There's not a lot this week because, after all, it is the week after WWDC, and everybody needs a little break, especially me. So let me tell you a little bit about what went on this week. The first one is an article that I've been thinking about for a very long time, that I knew the anniversary was coming up, so I finally wrote it on Sunday night. I thought, you know what, it's now or never. So I sat down and I wrote about the App Review Guidelines comic book, something that a lot of people forget about, but I know you know about because you actually wrote the story on MacStories about this 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And that year, it was 2016. That was Federico's first WWDC, first time he and I had ever met. And you were covering the show from your home, and I was watching the ADAs and had to be off to some social event. And at the very end, Apple did something that was very unusual. They introduced a comic book outlining all of the App Review Guidelines, because in 2016, App Review Guidelines went from a document with 30 sections to just 5. It was a complete overhaul of the entire structure and organization of the document, as well as a bunch of new rules. So as part of trying to explain it all to developers, Apple worked with a company called Madefire to create an actual physical comic book that's also a PDF that you can still find online through a link in the story that I wrote, that explains all 5 sections. It's like a 5-chapter comic book, and each one is a different style. And it's really strange, weird, and wonderful, and I don't think many people remember it anymore. But I do recall at the end of the ADAs getting in touch with you and saying, could you look at this strange thing and write something about it? Because I got to be somewhere, and we weren't expecting this at all. So you wrote a story about it, and 5 years later, I dug back in to see what was going on and explain it a little bit. It was a fun thing to do, and unfortunately, Madefire is no more. Their app is still on the App Store, and there are a handful of free comics that you can download if you're into motion comics, because that was their specialty, which are kind of a bizarre slideshow sort of comic book. But if you go to their website, you just get a white page. So
yeah, I remember this. This was strange at the time, and it feels even stranger now, 5 years later, to think that this is the way that Apple communicated that. But I still think it's solid. I read back through it after reading your article, and it's a fun way to present this information. I don't know if it would go over super well if they did this today, but yeah, I like it. I kind of wish they would keep doing more kind of crazy stuff like this.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. And it was interesting to see the evolution of the App Review Guidelines too, because in 2016 there were about 6,000 words in them, and now it's about 13,000. So it's really ballooned up again. So maybe it's time for another comic book and simplification of everything. The second story I want to mention is that Shazam has actually passed 1 billion monthly songs recognized, which is pretty amazing. I mean, this is a service that started out as a text messaging service in 2002 and then was one of the launch titles on the App Store. And it took them over a decade to get to their first billion Shazams, as they call them. And now they've actually passed 1 billion a month and 50 billion total. And, you know, at WWDC, we also saw the introduction of Shazam Kit, which will allow third-party developers to actually build Shazam song recognition into their apps, which I think there could be some interesting uses for. So I expect those numbers will continue to go up even faster once the feature is available in even more apps. So there's that.
I just love that Shazam, the name, is still around. I can't. I would have thought Apple would have kind of turned that into some generic term, but they've kept Shazam, and it's a good word. I don't know if it's ever quite gotten to be a verb for people.
No, I know Apple wants it to be a verb very badly. It's one of the few names that has survived. When you think about it, names that have survived: Shazam, Siri, Beats. Mm-hmm. That's about it that I can think of. Not even Workflow's gone, right. So that's shortcuts. So yeah, I don't know. All right, Alex, why don't you hit me with a couple of more stories?
Another big story that happened this week, or the continuation of a big story, is that Apple Podcasts channels and subscriptions finally launched. And so it's good to see, it was a pretty rough launch of this feature. Or it wasn't a launch. It was a pretty rough beta of this feature last month or the last couple months, but they seem to have gotten it together, and they finally dropped the system today, this week. And now it's out and ready to go. We can subscribe to podcasts in Apple Podcasts. I haven't subscribed to any quite yet. Have you?
I have not, although it is worth noting that there's actually a MacStories channel, not a subscription, but a channel. If you go to apple.co/MacStories, it'll take you right to our 3 shows in the Apple Podcasts app.
All right. And then the next story that we posted about this week is the Everyday Robots podcast, which interviewed a bunch of developers about WWDC. So they had a developer special. They had on, a whole slew of developers over 2 different episodes. And I thought it was a great kind of chat to kind of get the gauge of how developers were feeling. This was on Tuesday, so it was the day after the WWDC keynote came out. I don't know if the interviews might have happened the day of, but it was definitely fresh takes from the developers. And it was really enjoyable to listen to the opinions on that of a bunch of different devs, because a common thing that they felt was that the actual keynote itself was not super developer focused, which I think was pretty clear to all of us. But they were really excited about some of the more developer focused features like Xcode Cloud, which, as a developer myself, I can see how great that is going to be, or potentially is going to be. But basically, it's going to, allow you to do kind of running builds of things in the cloud, which could open up. I mean, we'll have to wait and see how Apple actually launches this, but it could open up some really interesting things. It could maybe, depending on how quick it is, you could start building apps from machines that otherwise you probably wouldn't want to do it on, kind of the lower end hardware. So that could be interesting. But it's worth a listen to see what all the developers thought about that as well. And then they were also really excited about some of the new language features coming in for Swift, which people on this podcast probably aren't as excited about. But as a JavaScript developer myself, I hear async await, and that's a great feature. For language geeks, everybody's going to love that one, and the developers were particularly excited about it.
All right. Yeah, those were really good episodes, and I really liked the format where it was a common question answered by a bunch of different developers. So go check that out if you haven't already. All right. I'm going to switch on over to Club Mac Stories, and this week in MacStories Weekly, we had a bunch of different things. We had a big giveaway from Pillow, which is a sleep app, as well as a straw poll where we are taking the pulse based on reactions to WWDC of the members of the club, an interview with Apollo developer Christian Selig, and I sat down and imagined my perfect research app, because I've been thinking about RSS and how it's not enough, and what I'd like to see an app do that is where RSS is a feature, but not the app itself. So check that out if you're a member of Club Mac Stories. And next on App Stories this week, we had a special episode. We've been doing a lot lately with App Stories. On Monday, we had an episode where we recorded live on Instagram Live, which was kind of fun. We'd never done anything like that before, and we talked a little bit about iOS 15 and some of our recent audio hardware purchases, and showed them off for the people who are watching on video, and put that out on the regular App Stories feed on Monday. And then on Tuesday, we talked to 4 of the 12 winners of ADAs this year, the Apple Design Awards. So we talked to Us2 Games and a bunch of others, the Pock Pock Playroom people, Carrot Weather, And it was a lot of fun. I mean, it's always interesting to me to hear the stories, the backstories behind these successful apps and these apps that Apple has recognized. And so we picked a cross-section of 4. I wish we had been able to talk to all 12, but that would have probably been a 4 or 5 hour podcast. And we were trying to keep it down to something reasonable, having just come off of recording 5 episodes in 6 days. So check that out if you haven't yet. There are a lot of great apps that won awards this year, and we've got 4 of them and discussions with the makers.
Yeah, I remember WWDC 2 years ago. I was with you when Poc was showing us their first beta. It was
oh, that's right.
Yeah, it was really cool back then, and I'm really glad to see that they launched it and got the recognition that app deserves.
Yeah, they have had a big month. They went from launching in May to winning an ADA in June. That's a pretty good track.
That is quite a launch.
Yeah, it is quite a launch. All right, Alex, let me tell you about our sponsor for this episode of MacStories Unwind and all of MacStories this week, which is MacStadium. MacStadium, for nearly a decade, has been focused on providing developers and Mac enthusiasts with customized Apple-centric solutions. MacStadium provides Mac infrastructure for everyone from solo developers to growing startups and Fortune 100 companies. Its solutions are trusted by iOS developers, mobile testing teams, and DevOps engineers around the world. In fact, MacStories actually runs and has been doing so smoothly for many years on a MacStadium server. MacStadium provides solutions to fit everyone's needs. They have everything from Intel-based Macs to the latest M1 Mac Minis. The company actually has hundreds of those M1 Minis with 3 different configurations in its data centers around the world, ready for instant activation for your next project. MacStadium is the only cloud provider to support and scale virtualization on Mac hardware. They can create private cloud environments with VMware, Virtu's Anka, and their own Kubernetes-based Orca solution. With more teams working from home than ever, having a Mac build infrastructure in the cloud is the perfect way to ensure your app developers can work as efficiently as possible. Recently, MacStadium announced a partnership with Teradici, the creator of PC over IP technology, to create high-performance remote access for the Mac. Working with Apple, the collaboration leverages MacStadium's infrastructure to streamline and accelerate the delivery of Teradici's CAS with PC over IP support for Mac customers around the world. Stay tuned because the product will be publicly available later this summer. Whatever your Mac infrastructure needs are, you owe it to yourself to give MacStadium a look today. Go to MacStadium.com to learn more. Our thanks to MacStadium for their support of the show. Okay, Alex, this is the part of the show, and this is your first time, so I'm going to ease you into this. This is where we start. We do our unwind picks, and this is where Federico and I get to go off of the usual script of our tech coverage and talk a little bit about some media that we've been enjoying. So, what have you got for us this week? You got something for me?
Oh yeah, I'm ready for you. I started watching the new Disney Plus show Loki. I think the first episode was 2 weeks ago or maybe last week. We're on the second episode. It just came out. I watched it as well. And this show is so much fun. I was enjoying it right off the bat. And, Loki has not exactly been one of my favorite characters, so I didn't know how I was going to feel about this show, but it is wild. There is some pretty. I don't want to go into any spoilers here, and I won't. But I highly recommend it. There's a bunch of stuff happening with time and the various the multiverse coming together into one, and it sounds like a lot. And it kind of is a lot, but it's really fun. And you have, Tom Hiddleston in the middle of all of it. And he's just doing great playing the God of Mischief. And I don't know. I think it's worth everyone to check it out if you're at all into the Marvel stuff. It sounds a little bit, all the time travel stuff can sound a little intimidating, but you have Tom Hiddleston in the middle of this just making the whole thing a fun ride.
Yeah, I've watched that too, and I really enjoyed the first episode. I haven't gotten to episode 2 yet, but I plan to watch that this weekend. So definitely worth a watch. I mean, I've been impressed with what they're doing at Disney Plus with these Marvel TV series because, there's smaller productions in the sense that they're not these big budget films necessarily. I mean, they have their own fairly large budgets, but they're doing a good job, I think, with the format and coming up with interesting stories that weave in with the whole Marvel universe.
Totally agree.
All right. My pick this week is a movie, and it's called The Courier, and it's a movie that just came out maybe a week or two ago, I think. It's a Benedict Cumberbatch film. He plays Greville Wynn, and Greville Wynn is a story based on true events where Greville Wynn was recruited by MI6 and the CIA in the early 60s to spy on Russia. And it's leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. And Greville Wynn was a business person who had contacts in Russia, and they used him because he wasn't a known operative for MI6 or the CIA, and he was in contact with a general in the Russian army, got a lot of information and secrets from Russia leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which helped avert a nuclear war based on the missiles that the Soviet Union was putting in Cuba at the time. So, an interesting story, really well done, and it kind of turns these real events into a spy thriller type of action movie, and I enjoyed it a lot. I don't know how true to the actual story it is, but I feel like there's been a real, I don't know, there haven't been a lot of really good movies over the last year and a half because of the pandemic, and this is one of the better ones that I've been able to rent on streaming. So you can rent it on the iTunes store, or I don't know, probably any place you can get rental movies, not just there, but that's how you get it. It's not on any streaming service yet. So, Alex, how was your first Unwind? Do you feel unwound?
Oh, I feel so unwound, John, and I'm going to be even more unwound when I go watch The Courier now because I have been needing a good movie coming in.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, that's it for this week, everybody. You can find me and Alex over at MacStories.net. I'm not even going to try to tell people where you are on Twitter and Instagram because I botched that the last time you were on the show,
you didn't
Alex.
do great.
Why don't you tell people how to find you on Twitter and Instagram?
I am on Twitter at _Alex Guyot, which is AlexGuyot. And I am on Instagram at AJ Guyot, AJGUYOT. The last name is a lot, but
It works.
It works.
All right. Yes, it works because it's your name after all, and people ought to get familiar with it
It's
because
true.
big things are coming from it.
It's not as easy to say as VOORHWES, though.
Well, I've practiced that, so you can find me in both places too. That's Twitter, that's Instagram, and it's John Voorhees in both places because I am a social media marketing whiz. That's JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you later, Alex.
Sounds good, John.